start. Okay, so we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. And today is December 15th, 2018. And 3 times homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so we have been reading and discussing. This is the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Threes, and we've been going through Sutta number 61, in which the first part of the Sutta, as we saw, the Buddha examines or cross-examines what are called the 3 sectarian tenets, 3 of the philosophical teachings that had been in circulation in the northern part of India during his time. One was the doctrine ascribed to the Jains, which is the thesis that whatever a person experiences, whether pleasant, painful, or neutral, is all caused by past deeds, by past karma. The other is the teaching that whatever a person experiences is all caused by the creative activity of God, of Ishvara. And then the third was the thesis that whatever a person experiences, all this occurs without cause or condition, just purely by chance. That was the doctrine that's ascribed to the Ajivakas, a rival sect during the Buddha's time. They were the proponents of Niyativada, the doctrine that everything is predetermined. So then the Buddha rejects each of these positions on the grounds that if they were true, then it would imply that whatever we do is predetermined. And so there would be no karma, no creation of fresh karma in the first place. And there would not even be a point in undertaking any kind of spiritual practices, since whether you undertake them or not, your destiny is predetermined. Okay, so then the Buddha, in opposition to this, he proposes what he calls the Dhamma that is unrefuted, undefiled, irreproachable. And then he mentions a number of factors or features within that Dhamma, the 6 elements, the 6 bases for contact, the 18 kinds of mental examination. So those we went through in the last class, and now we come to the last one, which are the 4 noble truths. And here we're going to have a somewhat unusual presentation of the 4 noble truths, different from the formulations that we usually see. So here I'm picking up with the passage that begins, when it was said, these are the 4 noble truths. This is the Dhamma taught by me that is unrefuted and so forth. For what reason was this said? Okay, so now the Buddha backtracks in a way. He goes back to the 6 elements. And so you could see why he introduced the 6 elements earlier in the sutta. So he says, on independence on the 6 elements, the 6 dhatus, the descent of a future embryo takes place. Okay, then the commentary, let's see if we can increase this. Okay, so the commentary raises the question, why does he begin in this way? And then it says, for ease of understanding, because the Tathagata, the Buddha, wants to explain the revolving of the 12 conditions. These are the 12 links of dependent origination. And so he shows the round, this is the round of existence, the round of birth and death, by the term, here it's translated, descent of the embryo. And you can see the Pali expression, gabasa avakanti. So this would be resolved. Thank you. Okay, this would be resolved, gabasa avakanti. And the word gabasa, of course, this is the genitive of the word gabba in Pali, which is equivalent to the Sanskrit garba. It has actually maybe two biological meanings. One meaning is the womb, the woman's womb. And the other meaning is the embryo. It also has a third, at least one other meaning. One is like an inner chamber of a building, something like corresponding now to the bedroom. But that meaning is not relevant here. So when we have the expression gabasa avakanti, and then when they're joined, you have gabas avakanti. The way I had translated it is descent of the embryo, but actually, of course, the embryo is not something existing outside the body, which descends as an embryo into the mother's womb and then starts to develop there. Because the embryo actually arises within the mother's womb. So this is just a kind of convenient expression. It might have even been a common expression during the Buddha's time that the Buddha just picked up and used. But what is meant, the way I would understand this, is that what descends into the womb is, again, this is somewhat metaphorical, but the stream of consciousness of the being who is to be reborn. And so we find in other suttas, and I took the passage from the Mahanidana Sutta, the great discourse on causation. So here, the Buddha is in conversation with the Venerable Ananda. So the Buddha is saying, it's said with consciousness as condition, there is nama-rupa, mentality, materiality, name and form. How that is so, Ananda, should be understood in this way. Here, if consciousness were not to descend into the mother's womb, would nama-rupa, mentality, materiality, take shape in the womb? And Ananda says, certainly not, Bhante. And if after descending into the womb, consciousness were to depart would Namarupa be generated into this present state of being. In other words, would name and form, mentality, materiality come out in the form of a baby, a living organism? And certainly not. And if consciousness of a young boy or girl were to be cut off during their childhood, would mentality, materiality grow up, develop, and reach maturity? Certainly not, Bhante. And so this is the cause, source, origin, condition for mentality, materiality, namely consciousness. Okay, so even when one speaks of consciousness descending into the mother's womb, okay, at one level, this is a more accurate expression than the expression the embryo descends into the mother's womb. So the embryo is really the mentality, materiality taking shape in the womb. But consciousness metaphorically descends into the mother's womb. And that is what initiates the life process of a new living being. But even this expression is somewhat metaphorical, so since it's not the case that like consciousness is somehow floating around out there, and then the woman gets pregnant, and then consciousness, miraculously, like like a flower descending out of the sky, or like a cloud of mist descending out of the sky, descends into the mother's womb. But this is just the kind of metaphorical process to express the idea of the consciousness of a being who has passed away from a previous life, springing up or arising in the mother's womb. And in another sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, this is expressed as the Gandhabba descending into the womb. We find this, let's see if I can find that sutta. This is in Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 38. This is the great discourse on the destruction of craving. Yeah, it says that there are three, it's through the coming together of three things that we have here, Gabasavakanti hoti, that there is the descent of the embryo. Okay, so here the mother and father have come together having sexual intercourse, and it's the mother's fertile season, and well, these are the negations. Okay, so it's when the three conditions, it's first the mother and father have sexual union, and it's the mother's fertile season, and then there is something called the Gandhabba. The Gandhabba is present. So the Gandhabba, this would be, we might call it the spirit of the deceased person that is present, sort of awaiting the opportunity to take conception. And so it's when these three conditions come together that there is the descent of the embryo. In other words, that conception takes place and there is the beginning of a new existence. And as for this, what is called the Gandhabba, or Sanskrit Gandharva, the way I understand this, I understand this against the background of contemporary reports that have been recorded of people who have recollections of their previous life and of their previous death and what takes place before their birth into this existence. And the way there's been a consistent reporting of this process across cultures that have had virtually no contact with each other. So the person finds themselves in their terminal illness, even lying on their deathbed, and then at a certain point, they find that their consciousness disconnects from the physical body, and they find themselves sort of floating in a subtle body, even up against the ceiling, looking down at their body, lying on the deathbed. And then they might see their relatives come into the room and look at the body, and then maybe feel the pulse, and then start crying. Then maybe 20 minutes later, a man who has some authoritative air about himself, carrying a little satchel, comes into the room, uses some instruments against the chest, again takes the pulse, maybe puts a mirror against the nostrils, and then turns to the relatives and says something, and then the relatives burst out crying, crying. And meanwhile, this person finds himself still from the ceiling, looking down at everything that's taking place in the room. And then maybe several days later, they'll see themselves at the cremation ground or at the funeral parlor or at the cemetery being buried. And then sort of that close connection to the body of the deceased person gets broken, but they still see themselves in what seems to be their original physical body, though it's a very subtle body, almost like an astral body. And they'll find themselves traveling over distances, sometimes long distances, no sense of the passage of time, until suddenly, or at a certain point, they'll find themselves attracted to a particular couple, and they'll hang around that house for a certain amount of time until the couple has sexual relations. Then they feel themselves drawn into the womb of the woman, and then they really lose consciousness, awareness of what is taking place, until after a certain undetermined period of time, they find themselves pushed out of the womb, out into the world. And that is the physical birth. And so it seems that it is that being that's here called the Gandhabba or Gandharva that corresponds to the Gubba, the embryo that descends into the womb to initiate the new existence. Okay, coming back to the sutta. Okay, so the sutta says, in dependence on the 6 elements, the descent of the future embryo occurs. Okay, now these 6 elements, if you remember, there are the 4 primary elements. So there's the earth, water, fire, and air elements. representing the properties, the earth, of solidity or hardness. The water is the liquid element or the principle of cohesion, physical cohesion. The fire element is the element of heat or energy, and the air element is the wind, the air involved in respiration and especially in movement. And then there's the space element and the conscious element. So we might see that those subtle 6 elements coming from the previous life in that being to be born form the condition for the 6 elements that arise in the new being. So we have the body of the fertilized egg consisting of the 4 primary elements. And then there's that moment of consciousness, that first moment of consciousness arises to start the process of becoming, to start the development of the embryo. And so those are the 6 elements that form the condition for the beginning of the process of the new existence. And then when that descent of the future embryo occurs, or the descent of consciousness into the womb, then there is the arising of name and form, nama-rupa. So when the consciousness descends, then the physical form of the egg becomes the beginning of the physical body of the new being. So as you can say that it's consciousness that quickens the fertilized egg and turns it into the body of a sentient organism. And then with the descent of consciousness, when consciousness links up to the physical organism, consciousness invariably brings along with it the other 4 or 3 mental aggregates: feeling, perception, and the volitional activities, which form nama, mentality. Okay, and so now the new existence begins through this conjunction of consciousness with nama-rupa, name and form, the 2 dependent upon each other. Some suttas compare this to, I think in Sariputta compares this to 2 stacks of reeds which are placed in such a way that they're leaning against each other, supporting each other. And so consciousness on the one side, name and form on the other, supporting each other. Okay, now as this newly formed organism begins to develop within the womb, over time, the eye starts to form, the eyes start to form, the ears start to form, the nose forms, the tongue forms, and the sentient body forms. Those are the 5 physical sense faculties. And then all along there's the mental faculty, the mind faculty. So those are the 6 sense bases which form, arise in the process of the embryonic development and then continue as the new being comes out into the world. Then when the being comes out into the world equipped with the 6 sense faculties, then there comes contact with the corresponding objects. And then through contact, with contact as condition, there is feeling, Vedana. And so now the Buddha says, interesting passage, I think we find this only here. He said, it is for one who feels that I proclaim, this is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering, this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Vedyamanasa kopanahang bhikkhave idang dukhanti panyapemi, and so forth. Okay, so we could see how the Buddha has brought this earlier exposition of the 6 elements and started here. We actually find the sort of sector, a section of the teaching of dependent origination brought in here just to introduce feeling. And then the Buddha says that I teach these 4 noble truths for one who feels, because it's actually through the experience, the felt experience of suffering, that one becomes receptive to the 4 noble truths. If we were just purely intellectual beings, sort of floating around in an ethereal realm of pure thought, without this capacity to feel suffering, then we could listen to the 4 noble truths for eternity, and they wouldn't make any impact on us. But it's because we have this capacity to experience suffering that when the Buddha says, this is the noble truth of suffering, our minds sort of perk up and we lend our ears and we listen and we could understand. Okay, so now the Buddha moves directly into the teaching of the 4 noble truths. So the first exposition, or the exposition of the first truth, the truth of suffering. So this is the standard exposition. Birth is suffering, old age, illness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection and anguish or misery is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. So that's the noble truth of suffering. Then interestingly, for the noble truth of the origin of suffering, usually we have, what is the noble truth of the origin of suffering? It is craving, which generates renewed existence and so forth. But here, the Buddha brings in the whole 12-fold formula of dependent origination. And so from this, we could see that in the usual formula of the 4 noble truths, in which the second noble truth is said to be craving, that is a kind of compressed or condensed presentation of the fuller analysis or diagnosis of the origination of suffering. But to see the full explanation, one has to bring in the 12-fold chain of dependent origination. Interesting question. If what I said is true, if it's the 12-fold dependent origination is the real full explanation of the origin of suffering, why does the Buddha just, in his usual exposition of the 4 noble truths, mention craving? What is the reason? Do we have the wireless microphone?
Thank you, Bhante. I was thinking maybe it's because the link between feeling and craving is really where you can work on trying to stop the dependent origination from extending further?
And maybe somebody, okay, now I'm going to play a debater. Okay, but if the fundamental origin is ignorance, the whole 12 links originate from ignorance, why not start and say, what is the noble truth of the origin of suffering? It is this ignorance. Then we could work on ignorance. We go.
Is it that once craving leads to rebirth,
Yeah.
all the other factors of dependent origination seem to sort of flow from that? With the development of the embryo, then the sense bases are developed. So saying craving or here ignorance leads to, and it's interesting, volitional activities, which then lead to consciousness. But it seems to me there's sort of an inevitability. When he says craving leads to rebirth, he's pointing out the key component, and then the others sort of develop from there.
Okay. I have to say that there's no right answer to my question. I just want to get different ideas. It's not like I'm testing to see whether you got it right or wrong. Drea?
Hi. Mine is similar to his. I was thinking craving leads to attachment and clinging, which, and I forget all the steps with it, but it leads to attachment, clinging, becoming, and then birth.
Yeah.
So it's similar to what the gentleman before said.
But you could say ignorance leads to volitional activities, which leads to consciousness.
Yeah, but it's the craving, which leads to attachment, the clinging.
Yeah.
And clinging that's like the key to rebirth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just taking a guess.
Well, also one could. Okay, Osmond, and then the Venerable.
Bhante, this brings to mind the taints, where it speaks about the craving for sensual pleasure as well as continued existence.
Yeah.
And it includes ignorance.
Yeah.
So craving is kind of like what they were saying, kind of like a all-inclusive term for renewal of being as well as the creation of karmic activities, existence.
But one could say that craving doesn't include ignorance. So why not start from, say, ignorance is the second noble truth?
Because it's like it's implied. You can't really have craving.
It is implied, but why not say it explicitly? Let's see, Venerable Mangala. Let's see here. I'm not saying that you're wrong, that everybody is wrong. It's just that I have my own idea, and so far, nobody has said exactly the idea that I have in mind.
I think if you say that ignorance is the cause of suffering, it's this very broad philosophical area where when you say craving, people can use that to reflect on their actions.
Did we discuss this during our walk?
Maybe. And I'm claiming it for myself that this is my idea.
Okay.
But no, like the Buddha as someone who wants people to investigate their actions, their thoughts, their motivations.
Yeah.
They can do that by saying, oh, if I follow these kinds of motivations, pushed by craving, I do suffer. Where you say ignorance, everyone's like, ignorance is this, ignorance is that, ignorance is this very philosophical idea. Thank you.
Yeah. Matt, did you want to? Stephen is closer. First Stephen, and then Matt.
It strikes me that craving is perhaps the most viscerally painful one of them all, because we can say ignorance is bliss, and we might not be so compelled to change
that's
anything.
very close to my own way of thinking. And Matt, I think, had something.
Could it be that craving is connected with the three characteristics of, non-self, impermanence, and suffering, so that if you're craving, you have a sense of self that keeps you from being able to really see the fact that there is no sense of permanent self, or
Okay, but
everything
then my debater will come and say, well, not knowing the three characteristics is ignorance, and so why not start from ignorance? Okay, I mean, it's possible. I said there's no right or wrong, but my thinking, what Venerable Mangala said and what Stephen said, that is my own thinking, that the Buddha, to make the teaching sort of immediately and viscerally, very good word, resonate with ordinary people. If he's teaching philosophically sophisticated renunciants, then one could begin with avijja or ignorance. But when teaching people, ordinary people of the world, if you start with ignorance, they'll think, this Buddha Dharma is for like the philosophical types, not for us. But people, their day-to-day activities in the world are governed principally by craving. Of course, ignorance lies behind that craving, but what they could see when they reflect on their attitudes, their emotions, their actions, their conduct, is the operation of craving. Like all of the social critics and analysts of our crisis today say, what is the big source of all of the global problems we're facing? They don't say it's ignorance, but they say it's greed, that greed has run amok. Greed is destroying our economy, our social systems, our climate. And so we could see that at the social level and also in our personal lives, how greed or craving is this terribly oppressive and compulsive force, whereas ignorance is sort of subtle and hidden in the background. Yes, Don?
Could you say a little bit about how ignorance leads to volitional activities and volitional activities lead to consciousness?
Yeah, for that I would have to give like a detailed exposition of dependent origination. But wait until we have the Labor Day Abhidhamma retreat, this 2019. Then we're going to have 4 days of dealing with dependent origination from the standpoint of the suttas and from the Abhidhamma. So please reserve that weekend, then you'll get it in a lot of detail. So now I'm just, very briefly referring to the whole formula of dependent origination. Okay, so we have the origin of suffering explained by way of the 12-factor dependent origination, and then the cessation of suffering by way of the cessation of the 12 factors. And then the way leading to the cessation of suffering is, again, it's the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. It's just this Noble Eightfold Path from right view through right concentration. So that's the noble truth of the path. Okay, so then the sutta ends with the Buddha saying that when it is said, these are the Four Noble Truths, this is the Dhamma taught by me that's unrefuted, undefiled, irreproachable, uncensored by wise ascetics and Brahmins. It is because of this that was said. And that's the end of the sutta. Okay, any questions on anything, not only today, but going back to last week as well? Is that Boe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bhante, I don't know if I remember correctly, but it seems that when you explained the 6 elements last time, you explained consciousness has to include other mental factors. But today, in explaining the process of a new being, you say consciousness is separate from Namarupa, right? So,
well, I think what I meant last week is that when the text, in the section on the 6 elements, so it mentions, okay, 5 of them are material elements, and then only the mental side of experience is represented only by the element of consciousness. So what I said, I think, is that when he mentions the element of consciousness, then to get the total picture of the mental side, we have to understand that feeling, perception, and all of the other volitional activities are implied or sort of accompany consciousness. But in describing the rebirth process, even what I would say is that consciousness is the main factor, the factor that sort of maintains the continuity of existence from one life to the next. But consciousness is always accompanied by the other 3 aggregates. Even in that transitional stage of the Gandhabba, that being sort of floating around in the astral body will also have a subtle kind of material form. There'll be consciousness, and there'll be the other 3 mental aggregates. And so it's that consciousness coming over the consciousness with the subtle feeling, perception, mental activities coming over through the transitional stage into the new life that initiates the new existence. Was that clear enough?
so when we say with consciousness as the condition, Namarupa comes to existence, right?
Yeah.
There's Namarupa. So that Namarupa, does that Namarupa include consciousness?
No. When it said that consciousness is the condition for Namarupa, then the Nama won't include consciousness, because consciousness is the condition for Namarupa.
So we say when consciousness accompanied with all the mental factors is the condition for Namarupa, and that Namarupa does not include consciousness.
No, insofar as it's the Nama that's conditioned by consciousness, then it doesn't include consciousness. But I know that in other versions of certain suttas in the Agamas corresponding to the Pali, when the analysis is given of consciousness as the condition for name and form, for Nama Rupa, then when it's explained what is Nama, it will mention consciousness. But I think that's not quite correct. But I know that that's just the tradition, the way those texts come down. Because when consciousness, sometimes when the expression nama rupa is used outside the context of dependent origination, then we could see it as including the entire mental side of experience, including consciousness. Even in the Pali tradition, that's the case. But when you're speaking about dependent origination, where consciousness is the condition for nama rupa, then a state is not the condition for itself. So then the nama has to exclude consciousness, because consciousness is the condition for nama. Okay, we'll have to move on to the next question. I think it was Osmond.
Bhante, along the same lines, it seems like when you're descending, or maybe even ascending in the dependent origination, when you reach to consciousness and name and form, I get the sense of like a loop is possible right there.
Yeah, actually, that is quite. You mean that there's a kind of reciprocal condition?
Exactly.
Exactly, exactly. In fact, there are some suttas which explain the relationship as that of a reciprocal or mutual conditionality. Like it's the simile, the sutta on the simile of the ancient city. Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 12. It's in chapter 12. And also in the great discourse, the Mahanidana Sutta. Okay, so consciousness is the condition for name and form. The name and form is the condition for consciousness, because consciousness has to get a footing, a foothold in name and form in order to grow and develop.
Oh, I see. I see. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, we'll take one more question and then we'll move on to the next sutta.
If the Gandhava is reborn in another realm, a higher realm, does that consciousness of, like in a rebirth to, to a person, is that consciousness awareness or memory of the past lives continue, or is it again a person reborn, the spirit reborn without any awareness of the previous?
I guess it depends on the realm. Certainly, the consciousness is reborn as an animal. I'm sure I could make a reasonable bet that there's no memory of the past life. Is there, Rover? Wait a bit. Okay, I'm sorry.
Doesn't the dog have Buddha consciousness?
Yeah, I don't think in the animal realm. I doubt in the hell realm. The Preta realm, I don't know. Probably some of the celestial realms, the way it's depicted in the story literature, the narrative literature. The being gets reborn in the Deva realm, and then they've raised, the question arises in their mind, how is it that I came to be reborn in this under such blissful conditions? And then they sort of look down or recollect their previous life, and then they remember, it was because I was a devotee of the Buddha, Buddha Gautama, and made these abundant offerings to the Sangha that I earned the merit that brought me to rebirth under these conditions. But whether that's an accurate account of what takes place, I don't know. Yeah. Okay, we'll just take one more, then I have to move on. We have to move on.
Bhante, if it's feeling that requires, like, to experience suffering, you require feeling. Let's say I attain the 4th formless jhana and then pass on, and then I'm reborn in the formless realm, right? Yeah. And I don't have feeling, and I'm just sort of this intellectual being. Can I then understand the Four Noble Truths, Yeah,
first, if you're reborn in the formless realm, then you don't have ears, so you can't hear. And so you're not able to hear the proclamation of the Four Noble Truths.
So what would then be the point of being reborn in the 4th formless?
That's why it's, for the Buddhists, it's considered an undesirable type of rebirth, to be reborn in the formless realm, unless one has already gained the comprehension of the Dhamma, as a stream enterer or higher. But if one hasn't, then it's considered a kind of rebirth to be avoided, because one spends 20,000, 40,000 aeons in this disembodied state where one doesn't get the opportunity to hear the Dhamma.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to move on now. Okay, so now we come to Sutta number 62, which is called Perils. I think it's Bhaya. Oops. Oh, this what? I see this. They didn't give a title. It seems that there was an editorial mistake here. But the key word is bhaya, bhayani, the word bhaya has two nuances, interrelated nuances. One is what I call the subjective meaning, which is that of fear, and then the other is the objective meaning, that which generates fear. In other words, danger or peril. So here, the text opens by saying that the uninstructed worldling, what's the ordinary person of the world, speaks of three perils, three calamities that separate mother and son. And I always find the sutta very, very poignant, so to speak. And I can imagine for a woman who has a son that it will be a very meaningful sutta. Okay, so and what's interesting, we find these three perils become very, very prominent today. So there comes a time when a great conflagration arises, and that great conflagration burns up villages, towns, and cities. So I think of that fires that have been consuming Northern California, even Southern California, Washington State. Okay, so when these villages, towns, and cities are burning up, then the mother does not find her son, and the son does not find his mother. So that is the first peril. Okay, then there comes a time when a great rain cloud arises, followed by a great deluge takes place. And then when the great deluge takes place, villages, towns, and cities are swept away. So I think of the hurricanes that have been striking in Katrina in 2005 in New Orleans, Hurricane Harvey, was it last year? Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico last year, this year. The one in Florida, even the names I don't remember anymore. There was in North Carolina, 2 years ago, Hurricane Michael. What was the one in Florida this year? Anyway, these terrible waters rise up and sweep away homes, and people get swept away by these deluges, or it could be a tsunami with great waves coming and sweeping away even hundreds or thousands of people at a time. Or a typhoon, like the typhoon that several of them have swept through the Philippines over the last few years. And then the mother does not find her son, and the son does not find his mother. And then something here is called, there comes a time of perilous turbulence in the wilderness, when the people of the countryside, mounted on their vehicles, flee on all sides. So this seems to be, the way I would interpret this today, a time of like civil disturbance, or turbulence, maybe like in Rwanda, 1993 or 94, when that conflict between the Tutsis and the Hutus, and people massacred, and more recently, this crisis in Syria, attacks on towns and cities where people are separated. And then I was thinking of the Rohingyas attacked in Rakhine State in Myanmar, and then close to 1 million of them flee from Myanmar into Bangladesh, even women getting separated from their children, and then give him a Nobel Peace Prize at the southern border of the United States, children being ripped away, babies ripped away from their parents. Okay, so in this case, the mother does not find her son, and the son does not find his mother. So this is the third peril that separates mother and son, of which the uninstructed worldling speaks. Okay, the next portion, a little bit, I have to say, a little bit obscure in the translation. So that there are these three perils when mother and son are reconnected, that the uninstructed worldling speaks of as perils that separate mother and son. But actually it's the same kind of perils. So we could say that these are cases where mother and son have been separated by these disasters, and then they find each other and they reunite. Okay, so in the first case, the village, town, and cities have been burning up, but sometimes the mother is anxiously looking, where is my son? And the son is anxiously looking, where is my mother? And then maybe in the crowd of refugees from this great disaster of fire, this great conflagration, they're wandering around searching, and suddenly from the distance, the mother sees her son, and the son sees her mother. And then the mother is overjoyed, my son, and the son is overjoyed, oh, my mother. And they come running to each other and embrace, and then they're weeping with joy. Ah, we're both safe and reunited. Why does it say son and not daughter? What? There was a time. Is it only the time? Or is there some visceral connection between mother and son that we don't have between mother and daughter? I don't know. I'm not a mother.
So is it saying a mama's boy?
Or it could be the cultural context at the time. They usually didn't deal with women back then. It was all the son, the son, the son.
Actually, that is true in Indian culture. Excuse me? In a lot of cultures. In the present culture. Okay, anyway, so the first situation is where the mother and son have been separated by the fire, then they reunite. And the second is when they've been separated by the great flood, and then they find each other and reunite. And the third is when they've been separated by this time of perilous turbulence, and then they find each other and reunite. Okay, then the Buddha says that there are three other perils that separate mother and son. So what are these three? It's the peril of old age, the peril of illness, and the peril of death. Okay, so the son is growing old, and then the mother has the wish, let me grow old, but may my son not grow old. Who has a son? Do you have that wish? Yeah. You don't have that wish. May I grow old, but may my son not grow old? You want your son to grow old. You want your son, you don't want your son to grow old? Please take the microphone.
I don't think I've had that wish. I have 3 sons, but the thought floats by periodically, I'm sorry I won't be there to take care of them when they get older.
Yeah. Anyway, it seems something unavoidable that one doesn't have the wish. This seems a bit of an odd wish for a person to have. But I think the second one is more realistic. Okay, when the son has fallen ill, the mother might have the wish, let me fall ill, but may my son not fall ill. Of course, the woman doesn't want to fall ill, but still she'll have the wish, if one of the two of us have to fall ill, let it be me, not my son. You don't think so? Yes, Mano.
Yeah, I think the underlying premise is that
Take the microphone, please.
I think the underlying premise is that no parent wants their child to suffer.
Yeah.
And the suffering in Buddhism is old age, sickness, and death.
Yeah. But I'm just asking, is this true as a psychological fact? It seems to be, yes?
I think it might be common, actually. When my son developed cancer at the age of 11,
Well,
I mean, it really crossed my mind. I'd rather it be me. And I imagine that's common, not just for sons, for daughters as well.
Yeah.
That let me bear cancer and not my child.
Yeah. And did you have any, Bowie? Did you? You could take the microphone.
I would think that way too.
Yeah. I would think so too. I don't know whether their sons, when their mother falls ill, think, let me fall ill, but may my mother not fall ill. If there are, it would be, I don't know, it would surprise me. Okay, then if the son is in some way being vulnerable to death, the mother might wish, let me die, but may my son not die. Of course, this would be a very heroic wish, but I could quite naturally see it in the case of a woman wishing to take death upon herself in order to protect the son. I remember reading about cases, this was during the period of Nazi Germany, women, in order to protect their children, not only the sons but also the daughters, they would separate from them. They would sort of, through some secret channels, have their children registered as being not Jewish and then sent off to other countries, even though they took the risk that they would be found out for doing that, discovered by the Nazis, and then killed. But they were willing to sacrifice, to put their own lives at risk in order to protect the lives of their children, to ensure that their children would continue to live. Okay, so anyway, so both mother and son have the wish, let the other one not grow old, not fall sick, and not die, but let old age, illness, and death come to me. Okay, but then the sutta ends by saying that there is so those are the three perils that separate mother and son, but there is the path that leads to the abandoning and overcoming of these three perils when mother and son reconnect, and of these three perils that separate mother and son. So what is the path and way? It is this noble eightfold path, right view to right concentration. So that's the path that leads to the abandoning of these three perils when mother and son are separated and reconnect, and of these three perils that separate mother and son. But one could say the Noble Eightfold Path, it doesn't rejoin mother and son in some kind of eternal heaven. Or it's not the case that mother and son both get delivered over to nirvana and then find themselves, hey, you're in nirvana, I'm in nirvana, we're both in nirvana, and let's rejoice together. Right? But the Christian might say, well, that shows the unsatisfactoriness of the Buddha's teachings. We teach that if you both believe in the teachings of the church and you do good deeds and you follow the teachings faithfully, you both get reborn into heaven, and then you spend eternity together in heaven. What do you say to this? Okay, well, you both wind up with wings. Do they get wings in heaven? Or just the angels have wings, but you wind up in a white gown and you're both playing a harp. Or maybe one is playing the harp, the other's playing the flute. A good combination.
Bhante, I don't think spending eternity with anyone would be enjoyable. I mean, Sartre wrote No Exit about that. So we have a play already about that from Sartre. And I don't think I could even spend eternity with my grandfather.
With
my grandfather.
Your grandfather. Okay, I get reborn in heaven. I see my mother's there, and she's saying, Jeffrey, why did you become a monk? Aren't you going to grow your hair longer?
Oh, God.
And I'm saying, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Okay, Carolyn wants to say something.
I don't think I've ever heard it said in Christianity. I think people hope they're going to be reunited with their family. You hear you're going to be with the divine, but you don't hear you're going to be with your family. My sister has this image, everybody in the family will be sitting at a table having dinner together. It's her own mind. I'd just like to share yesterday was the anniversary at Sandy Hook.
Yeah, that's right.
And with the peril, and because I was there, the separation of mother and child, and them looking for their children was just terrible, waiting to hear about their child.
Yeah.
And just on a note of that I think goes with this, I did take care of a family afterwards. They lost the one daughter and had a 5-year-old that survived. And I was with the 5-year-old intimately and just to be sure she was okay. And one day she said to me, if mommy and daddy would just stop crying, they would see that Allison never died. Mm-hmm. She was 5 years old, that she's right here. I wish they could stop crying. And I thought the wisdom of the child and how and understanding's there that we lose. And it's not that I wouldn't want to be with my son, or I wouldn't want him to be sick and not me. But when there is a deep this is just myself, when there is a deep understanding, we do have a certain karma, we have a certain way to be and things we have to go through, that we can grow through them, that, there's an acceptance of things as they are, and it makes it a lot easier. This is for myself. Thank you.
Anybody else have any comments on this? Okay, shall we go on to the next one? Let's see if we could take the next one. Yeah, we could do in 15 minutes, I think. Okay, so this sutta begins with the Buddha, when the Buddha's walking on the Charika, the wandering tour, in the state of Kosala, and then he comes to a certain village of Brahmins called Vainagapura. I don't think it's mentioned elsewhere. Okay, the opening portion is this sort of stock passage where the Brahmin householders hear this report that the Samana Gautama has arrived, and they hear this good report that he's a fully enlightened Buddha, the Bhagava, the Blessed One, and he teaches the Dhamma that's good in the beginning, middle, and end. And so they go to see him, they come, they greet him in various ways. And then a Brahmin named Vajragota comes and says to the Buddha that it's astounding and amazing how Master Gautama's faculties are tranquil, and the color of his skin is pure and bright, just as a yellow jujube fruit in the autumn is pure and bright. So Master Gautama's faculties are tranquil, and the color of his skin is pure and bright. Does anybody know what the yellow jujube fruit is? Yeah, I don't know what it looks like. But just as a palm fruit, this would be probably what they call in Sri Lanka the tambali. Tambali is the king coconut. It's a kind of yellow-orange color that has been removed from its stalk, is pure and bright. So Master Gautama's faculties are tranquil, and the color of his skin is pure and bright. Again, just as an ornament of finest gold, placed on red brocade, shines and beams and radiates, so Master Gautama's faculties are tranquil, and the color of his skin is pure and bright. Okay, then the Brahmin continues. This is a rather strange passage. He speaks about various kinds of high and luxurious beds or seats, a sofa, divan, and so on and so on. The kinds of things that I would imagine that the Indian millionaires and billionaires of the time would enjoy. And then he says, surely Master Gautama gains these at will without trouble or difficulty. Okay, my hypothesis that this is an artificially constructed sutta to provide an opportunity for the Buddha to speak about the things that he attains. Because I don't think that any Brahmin householder in the Buddha's time would have imagined that an ascetic who was wandering with a big company of ascetics, wandering by foot from town to town and from village to village, is going to obtain all of these kinds of luxurious beds, including those that have sheets made with silk threads and that are studded with gems, and so forth. Of course, I might be wrong about this. Okay, so the Buddha then says that these high and luxurious kinds of beddings are rarely obtained by those who have gone forth. And even if they're obtained, they're not allowed. So these are the kinds of beddings that are actually prohibited by the monastic precept to abstain from high and luxurious beds and seats. Okay, but the Buddha then continues and he says, however, there are these other kinds of high and luxurious beds that at present I gain at will without trouble or difficulty. So what are these three? So one is the celestial high and luxurious bed, the divine high and luxurious bed, and the noble high and luxurious bed. Okay, so in the Pali it's Dibang. Actually, Dibang would be Divyang, would be closely connected with the English word divine. But to my mind, divine suggests something higher than celestial. So I rendered Dibang as celestial. And then Brahma is the divine, super divinity in Indian thought. So Brahmang is what I render as divine, the divine, high and luxurious bedding. And then the third one is the Aryan, the noble, high and luxurious bed and seat. Or bed. So those are the Buddha says, those are the three high and luxurious beds that I obtain. Okay, so now the Brahmin asks the question, so first, what is the celestial high and luxurious bed that you obtain? And then the Buddha says that when I'm living in dependence on a certain village or town, in the morning I enter the town or village for alms, and after the meal, when I've returned from the alms round, then I enter a grove and I collect some grass or leaves. And I put them into a pile, and then I sit down, folding my legs crosswise, and I establish mindfulness in front of me. Then, secluded from sensual pleasures, from unwholesome states, I enter and dwell in the first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. Okay, so those are that's the celestial, high and luxurious bed that the Buddha obtains, the 4 jhanas. Then what comes next is interesting. He says, then Brahman, when I am in such a state, if I walk back and forth on that occasion, my walking back and forth is celestial. If I'm standing, my standing is celestial. If I'm sitting, my sitting is celestial. And if I lie down on that occasion, this is my celestial, high and luxurious bed. So this is the celestial, high and luxurious bed that at present I gain at will without trouble or difficulty. And why I say this is interesting. If one looks at this at surface value, it seems to be saying that the Buddha is able to walk back and forth, to stand, and to lie down while in the 4 jhanas. But actually, the way the commentary explains this, and I agree, one can't actually walk back and forth or stand while in the jhana itself. But what's said is that the Buddha enters the four jhanas, then emerges, and he's still in a kind of the afterglow of the jhana. He's able to walk back and forth and to stand. But when in the jhana, one has to be in the sitting position, or maybe the lying down position, but not walking back and forth and standing. Okay, then comes what is the divine high and luxurious bed that you gain at will? And then the Buddha, he starts off the same way, but in this case, he explains the divine high and luxurious bed as the 4 Brahma Viharas. That's why it's called the divine Brahma Uchasayana or Mahasayana, because it's the 4 Brahma Viharas that's pervading the whole world with loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. Okay, and then what is the noble, the Aryan high and luxurious bed that at present you gain without trouble or difficulty? Again, the beginning is the same. And then it says, I establish mindfulness in front of me, and then I understand thus, I have abandoned greed, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it so that it is no more subject to future arising. Similarly, I have abandoned hatred, abandoned delusion, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it, so it is no more subject to future arising. And then the commentary just says that this shows that lust and so forth have been abandoned by the path of arhatship at the site of the great enlightenment. And so it said that by means of reviewing this, he refers to the attainment of fruition. So this would be the fruition attainment of arhatship that the Buddha can enter through the abandoning of greed, hatred, and delusion. And so that is the noble bedding that the Buddha obtains. And then the Brahmin, when he hears this, then he applauds the Buddha and he goes for refuge to the three jewels. Okay, I think we'll have to end here for today. If there are any questions about this, we could bring it up during the question. We could come back quarter after 12. We could have a short Q&A. And so we'll end here. And next week we'll have a class, even though the Amitabha retreat begins that evening, but we could have the class in the morning, probably in the library. Of course, the hall will be set up for the retreat. Okay, so we'll end with the sharing of the merits. Okay. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Bhavagupadaya avici hetato etantare satakayupapanna arupya rupicha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting. Okay, so we could stand and we end with 3 half bows.